Right. So, hi everyone. I'm live today with Barney Whiter, sorry, here for our financial wellbeing webinar in collaboration with Urban. So today we're here to try and give you more information about what financial support is available to self-employed professionals, and also try and help you answer questions that you may have about this. The format of the webinar today is going to be the following. So we will first go through a short presentation about what support is available for self-employed specifically, and also what other alternative there may be if you're not eligible. So that's Barney here is going to do that, and then we will give you some more information about how you could be bridging the gap, in these times and overcoming financial anxiety. We will also, as part of this webinar, answer the question that some of you have asked about the support available and your specific situation. We will first answer the questions that some of you have asked as part of the survey that we've done before the webinar. And then if you do have more questions during the session, please ask them on the live on the site, and we will try to answer as many of those as possible. Barney, hi. How are you? Hello.
I'm well.
You are? Okay, brilliant. Do you want to introduce yourself as a start, and then I'll start sharing the slide that you've prepared for us?
Yeah. So thanks, Elsa. My name is Barney Whiter. Quick, very brief background on me. I originally trained as an accountant, and then I worked in the city in finance for 20 years. And for the last 6 years, I've been writing about money, teaching people about money, and working as a financial coach. So you could kind of think of me as if you imagine a personal a personal trainer rather, but I do finance rather than exercise. So I guess that's how to think of me. And so in terms of what we're going to cover today, we've got some slides that Elsa's going to put up about the government self-employed income support scheme, universal credit, some ideas about how people can bridge the gap until the money hopefully arrives for some or most of you in June from the government support scheme. And then we've taken some questions from you and answered those. And if you have any others, as Elsa said, you can kind of key those into YouTube as we go along, and we'll see if we can answer those. And then finally, we'll just finish off with a kind of few well-being tips and I'll give you some sources of places you can go for further information.
Brilliant, thank you.
So the government's self-employed income support scheme comes as in the form of a grant. So it's not a loan. It's a gift of money from the government, but it is taxable. And the expectation is that it will be one lump sum payment that's paid in June. And so that will cover kind of April, May, June. It may be extended thereafter. That all depends on what the government decides to do with the period of the lockdown, etc. And so what we know at the moment is that that amount that people will hopefully be paid in June will be based on your self-assessment tax returns for the last 3 years. So for the 3 years ending on 5th of April 2019. And the way that that's calculated is as an average. So if you imagine 3 years where maybe in the first year you earned 23,000, in the second year you earned 24,000, and the third year you earn 25,000, well, your average over those 3 years would be 24,000. You would get 80% of that and a quarter of that for April, May, June. And so if your average profits were £24,000, you would get a one-off payment of £4,800 in June. That would be paid to your bank account directly by the government's Revenue and Customs Department. And they should already have, if you filed self-assessment tax returns, you've already given them your bank details, so they know where to send the money. In terms of the criteria, you must have earned more than 50% of your income from self-employment to qualify for this income support scheme. It's okay if you were also employed, but as I say, you must have earned more than 50% of your income from self-employment to qualify for this grant. And you may be able to, if you were employed, you may be able to be furloughed under the employment scheme. So that's one to take up with your employer if that's relevant. You should have already have filed your self-assessment tax return for 2018-2019, because the normal deadline for that would have been the 31st of January 2020, but the government's extended that until the 23rd of April, so you've got 3 more days for anyone that's late already. And in terms of the gaps, if you like, in the coverage of the scheme, the biggest gap I think is likely to be the fact that the scheme does not cover those who started working on a self-employed basis after 6 April 2019. And as I said, it's HMRC that will contact you. So you don't need to worry if you kind of haven't heard from them just yet. Okay.
Barney, just on this, one quick question.
Yeah.
That we've got from Jonathan here. He's asking, so for the total amount we will get from the grant, we will need to pay 20% tax. So essentially they will be giving us 40% as they only pay for 80%, so 20% is already missing.
So if it's, yes, so it's taxable, and so the amount of tax that you pay on that will be determined by your income. So for example, everyone has a personal allowance where you're exempt from income tax. So if you only earned 5,000 in the year and then you got this grant of 4,800, you would actually never pay any tax on that because you'd be below the personal allowance.
Okay, thank you. Should we move on to the next slide?
Yep.
Universal credit.
So universal credit is the next option, and you can clearly we've got a timing problem. So even if you are eligible for the self-employed income support grant in June, if you haven't got any other income coming in until June, clearly there's a cash flow problem there. And so you can make a claim for universal credit while you wait for your income support grant in June. And there's really no reason not to do that. I can't see any reason why you wouldn't do that. And the worst that can happen is that you're not eligible for universal credit, but there's no penalty, there's no downside, there's no hidden catch. The government's not trying to catch people out here, and it takes a period of time to be accepted for universal credit. That can be a few weeks, but you can apply online. You don't have to go and go to an office. You don't have to go and queue. You can apply online. You can ask them to call you back, and you can get an advance on your universal credit hopefully within a period of days, maybe a week. And so you shouldn't have to wait weeks and weeks for universal credit to come through. Having said that, clearly at the moment, there's a lot of people applying for universal credit. So the number of claims that the system is dealing with at the moment is running at about 10 times its normal level. So the government's trying to make it easy for you. So you don't have to sit on the phone waiting for them. You can go online and they will leave your number and they'll call you back. So it's not like you have to spend all day kind of sat in a queue. The amount of universal credit will be different for everyone. So the way it's calculated is there's a base amount for people under 25 of £343 a month, £410 for single people over 25. But it could be a lot more than that for those with housing costs that you need help with, for those with children and those with health conditions. And so the amount that you actually could be entitled to could be 5 times that amount. So you could be maybe eligible for £1,500 a month, but it's different for you and your circumstances. As I say, you don't have to go to an office in order to apply. You don't have to physically go to the offices to apply for universal credit online. The website to do that, we've included it on the last page of these slides. You will need to prove your identity with some documentation, but that you should have already have done that to be on the Urban platform. So it's a kind of similar process of just checking your identity. The one thing that will prevent you being eligible for universal credit is if you have significant savings. So the government, rightly or wrongly, expects you to use savings if you've got a significant amount of those, to use those savings first. So you will not be eligible for universal credit if you've got more than £16,000 of savings. And if you have between 6,000 and 16,000, that will be taken into account when they calculate your specific entitlement. So it starts to reduce if you have £6,000 of savings or more, and you lose entitlement if you have 16,000 or more. Does that make sense, Elsa?
Yeah, it makes sense. Just a quick question on the documents that you will need to provide when applying for universal credit. We do have Julia here asking if she would need a tenancy agreement to apply for universal credit.
No, you should be able to prove your identity with stuff like so those examples on the slides, passport, driving license, debit card, those examples come straight from the government's own website. So it shouldn't be necessary for you to supply a tenancy agreement. That could be one form of identification that they might accept, but that's not specified as something that you have to provide.
Okay, and as part of universal credit, I believe that there is also housing benefits being factored into it. To have this, does this mean that you would then need to provide a tenancy agreement to pretend to housing benefits as part of universal credit?
Potentially, yeah. So again, the way that this works is that you will be when they make the assessment, they will kind of interview online or by telephone, and the officer that's dealing with a case, they will have certain things that they may ask for, but it's kind of it'll depend on a case-by-case basis.
Okay. To all of you that are asking questions about self-employment support package, we will move on to the next slide, but we will answer those later.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to repeat the point I made, I really can't see a downside of applying for universal credit. So the worst that can happen is that that you're for some reason not entitled to it, or there's a delay. But you will never be penalised for doing that, for making an application in good faith and providing honest information.
Okay, brilliant. No, I think that was very useful to specify. So now we're moving on to a more a slide more about bridging the gap. You know, like in the meantime, any of the financial support may come. You know, how do you handle this time? So, so Barney, if you want to go over that.
Yes. So the self-employed income support scheme is more generous in some ways than the employment furloughing scheme, because with the employment furloughing scheme, they're asking you kind of to stay home and not work, whereas specifically this self-employment scheme, they are encouraging you, if you can find some form of work, to do that. And so that could be either something related to what you currently do, or it could be kind of casual work. So for example, they're not penalizing you for, you know, getting a temporary job at a supermarket or fruit picking, etc. So working is allowed. It doesn't remove entitlement to the income support scheme. I mean, it's one of the things they'll consider when they calculate your the amount of universal credit you're entitled to. But the message is you are allowed to work on other things if that's something that you can find and something that you want to do. Very practically, in terms of lowering your living costs for the next 3 months, what I would be doing is I would be looking at where my outgoings, where my main outgoings are, and looking to see what flexibility there is to reduce those or defer those as necessary. So for example, you know, if you're paying rent at the moment and you're in financial difficulties, you should talk to your landlord. If you envisage problems paying your mortgage, you should talk to your mortgage provider. And essentially, the government has handed out regulations to landlords and to banks and to mortgage providers. So you cannot be, you know, it's not like you can't be penalized for asking for a mortgage holiday. So it kind of to defer a payment or a rental payment. Equally, if you're in financial difficulties and you're struggling to pay things like council tax and utility bills, I would encourage you to contact your local council, contact your utility provider, and discuss your situation with them. If you just don't pay, then that will potentially annoy the provider, and B, that may affect your credit rating. But if you proactively go and speak to your bank or the council or your power company about deferring for a month or two, that shouldn't affect your credit rating.
And I think here I'd like to add as well, there is a letter that Urban can provide showing that, you know, we've suspended home bookings from the 23rd of March. If you needed any proof of, you know, of that, that's absolutely fine. Just speak to customer support and we'll be more than happy to provide you with that letter to help you justify this request to your landlord or to the council. I know that some of you have already asked, but I thought it might just be useful to let you know that this was something we could definitely provide.
Okay, and then you know, I think finally the message I think is, you know, you may be kind of a really hardworking individual that doesn't naturally like to ask for help, but this is a sort of time where it's, you know, everyone's kind of in the same boat, and so it really does make sense to kind of not be hung up about that and be confident to talk to your landlord, talk to your mortgage provider, talk to your family and friends, and because kind of so many people are in the same situation right now.
Yeah, and again, please be proactive, because as Barney said, if you just not pay, this is likely to affect and penalize you in some way. But if you are being proactive and you have proof of that, then it should definitely you know, help and have limited effects on any credit or anything like this. Right. Anything that you would like to add for this section of the webinar, Barney?
No, that's all I had on that page, I think.
Okay, brilliant. So some of you had you know, questions about the support scheme and eligibility. So as some of you know, I've shared a survey with all of you prior to these sessions that we could use your questions to build the best, you know, the best webinar possible, and really something that would help you, you know, make sense of everything that is available as a support. I've listed some of those questions. Of course, they remain anonymous. I've listed some of those questions onto the slide because answering those publicly would probably help the wider community understand and best use the financial package. We also have one after that about universal credit. So if you did ask something about universal credit as part of the survey we ran, it's probably on there. We're going to start by answering the questions on the slide now, and then any questions that is currently on the chat about eligibility, I will add on top if not already answered by Barney. Does that work for you, Barney? Cool.
Yep.
So the first question is, I only have 1 month of accountancy for the financial year of 2018-2019 as I become self-employed in March. How likely would I be included in the government scheme helping self-employed?
So if that means that this person became self-employed in March 2019, then they would be included. Okay, because it's before that cutoff of 6th of April 2019. So the good news is they would be included, particularly if that 1 month was solely from the income was solely from self-employment and there was no employment income in that month. So you've passed that 50% test that we talked about. So yes, it looks like this person would be included. The problem would be that the quantum, the amount would, I'm guessing, be very low, because it would kind of be 1 month's profits, and probably if it was their first month, it would be relatively low for them.
Okay, so they will be definitely calculating, you know, the amount. They'll be basing the 80% on that March, from March to April 2019.
Yeah.
Calculate the amounts they'll be entitled to. Is there other like specific criteria, such as the fact that they should still be trading now to be entitled to this support, Barney?
No, you don't have to prove that you're still engaged in the business, because the point is, a lot of people wouldn't be trading right now. A lot of people can't trade right now. So, you know, this being a massage therapist would be a good example. So if you just can't do that, the government's not trying to trip you up. It's not trying to penalize you. It's trying to help and recognize the fact that some people just cannot earn money at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. The second question is, I am both self-employed and employed. Can I access the self-employed support scheme?
Yes. So you can be, so the simple answer is yes. You can access the self-employed support scheme if you were both employed and self-employed. Again, the caveat to that is that up to 50% of only up to 50% of your income can come from self-employment. So when they look at that 3-year period, they're going to be looking to see that the majority of your income came from self-employment.
Okay, and they will be seeing this as part of the tax return that you've done for these
Yes,
years.
yes. And if that person, if that individual is still employed, then they should talk to their employer about the furlough scheme.
Okay, which you said earlier that could potentially be combining both. Well. Okay. The third question is, I have been self-employed working with Urban since May 2019. I have been furloughed by my other job. If I decide to get a temporary job, like picking fruits, for instance, one, could I do this, providing that I've been furloughed by my other job? And second, how would this affect my furlough payment? We're assuming here that the furlough in the question is the employment furlough and not the self-employed package.
Yes, yes. So this is an interesting question, because to be furloughed, you're not supposed to be doing any work for your employer that's furloughed you, but you are allowed to go and do casual work such as fruit picking. And so the answer to that question, I think, is yes. You can go and get a temporary job. You can go and pick fruit, for instance. That should not affect your furlough payment.
Okay, by the furlough payment by an employer, or being eligible for the self-employed scheme, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Both.
Thank you. Brilliant. And just for clarity, as you mentioned before, you could benefit from the furlough and also benefit from the self-employment scheme. How would that work? Do you know, like the combination of the two? Do you have
well, it's just like in the past you've been combining the two. And so essentially there's no reason for the two schemes to be combined for the purposes of the government support.
Okay. Okay, brilliant. But again, you would not be eligible for the self-employment package if you've been self-employed for less than 50% of your income.
Correct.
Okay, fantastic. Fourth question, I registered myself as a self-employed on the 28th of April, 2019. Am I still allowed to receive the grant as self-employed? I read that I can have it because I've been traded in 2019 and 2020, and I have stopped because of the pandemic.
I don't think so. So I think that because that's after the 6th of April 2019, I think that falls into the gap.
Yeah. Okay. That's clear. And
now, again, I would encourage people to go to the HMRC website themselves. You do have the ability to phone HMRC as well. So you know, there's no, I don't, unfortunately, I don't think that person is eligible. But on the other hand, it costs nothing to have a phone call and double check that.
Okay, brilliant.
And the other thing I would say is that it is possible that the rules change. So these rules were put together by the government at very short notice, essentially over a weekend. And so they have had to kind of create this arbitrary cutoff of the 6th of April 2019. And it seems very unfair that this person who started on just on the 28th has missed that. But that's how the scheme has been set up. So all I would suggest is kind of look at the guidance for yourself. You can call HMRC, and it's possible that this will change.
Okay. Probably very busy line at the moment.
Yes.
To call HMRC. Fifth question is, how will my tax return look like for 20 and 2021 if I've claimed the self-employed help?
Yeah, so it will just look like you've got multiple sources of income. And so you will have to, there will be a question on it that says, did you receive a, I'm guessing now because I haven't seen the kind of the tax return, but I'm guessing they'll put a question on it that says, did you receive self-employed income support? They may, I mean, they obviously paid you, so they will have a record of it. So maybe they'll kind of auto fill that out next year. But essentially what it will mean is you will have more than one source of income, because you'll have your trading income kind of when lockdown lifts and you're back to normal, but you'll also have this grant that you're receiving in June. And so that will be an additional source of income, which, as we said before, is taxable. So you'll just have more than one source of income on your tax return.
Okay, brilliant. Let me quickly just have a look at the questions that we've had specifically about eligibility to make sure that we can add any on this. So Graham here asks, what happens if you earned the majority of income from payee for one of the 3 years of self-employment?
So they can, if you're not, so the way that they calculate the average is they look for 3 years, but if you haven't got the full 3 years, they will calculate the average on the 2 years. So again, I don't know yet, and HMRC haven't done these calculations yet. But it's possible that they'll just run that calculation on the 2 years and exclude the year where you're over 50% from the calculation.
Thank you. And then Yasmin is asking, I've joined full-time in October 2019. What rights do I have, please? And what else are available for me?
So you would be not eligible for the self-employed income support because it's after 6th April 2019 as things stand. So that doesn't help. So you have the universal credit option as your first and foremost option. So I would encourage that person to apply as soon as possible for universal credit. Now, in terms of other things that we haven't yet talked about, there has been talk about, there is a business interruption kind of loan scheme. My understanding is that if you're a self-employed massage therapist, that probably would not qualify for a business interruption loan. So that I can't say that 100% certainty, but my reading of the criteria was that's not a very likely source of support. Some councils have started to create, so Liverpool Council, for example, created like a hardship fund, sort of separate from universal credit. So again, it's worth looking perhaps at your local council website to see if your local council has any other additional local schemes in addition to these national schemes that we're talking about.
Okay.
And then the final kind of piece of additional help is that normally if you're self-employed, you would have to make a tax payment in July. And essentially the government has said you don't have to pay that for this year until next January. So you've got a cash flow saving there.
Okay. Thank you. About the business interruption loans, from what you've been reading, what makes you think that self-employed, practitioners like Urbans would not be eligible?
So those are being administered. Those schemes are being administered by private sector banks, so like Barclays, Lloyds, Royal Bank of Scotland, and essentially they were designed for larger businesses, businesses that employ people and kind of have assets and employees. So there has to be they're not grants, they are loans, and they're commercial loans, and there has to be like a business case. So you would have to provide a business case for that. So they would kind of be expecting, I don't know, like a 30-page business plan, etc. So I'm not saying 100% impossible, but my reading of it was that that is not designed for kind of self-employed people, really.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you very much. Ria is asking, will the self-employed grant cancel out your universal credit?
No. So you can and you should apply for universal credit, and the income support that you get will be unaffected by that. So, I mean, everything will be taken into account in your tax return. So they'll have the whole picture at the end of it, but there's no reason not to apply for universal credit and to see if you will be eligible for the self-employed income support scheme.
So does that mean that even in June, for example, when they receive the money from the self-employment package, they will still be able to receive universal credit, or do you think that this payment will reduce from universal credit as soon as it starts?
So again, that's dependent on the individual circumstances. So let's say you received like a £10,000 payment from the self-employed scheme. Well, then suddenly your savings might be above the £6,000 limit, and so that does affect your universal credit calculation.
Okay.
That's not a reason not to apply for universal credit, and it's not a reason not to take the self-employed income support.
Okay, so going through quickly. Zonita, as I've asked, I became self-employed in October 2019. What am I entitled to claim? Believe that same situation. Anyone becoming self-employed after the 6th of April 2019 will not be able to, will not be eligible for the self-employment support scheme. Am I correct, Barney?
Yes, that's a similar, we had that question, I think, from someone else. Similar.
Yeah. So, Jonathan is asking, what happens if you needed to take money from your tax return money to survive between getting paid and any universal credit or grant, would you get into trouble for that or penalized?
No. So that's a good point. So if I had been working self-employed and kind of putting money aside in a tax account, that tax account now is something that you can raid to put money on, to put food on the table. And essentially, as I said earlier, they've waived or delayed the norm. Normally you would have to pay some money over in July, but they've pushed that out till January 2021. So if you've put some money aside, you can use that, and you're not going to have to kind of hand it over in July. So that is a kind of a source, a piggy bank that you can raid, as it were. And the other thing is that the government has recently clarified that that money that you've put aside for your tax payment, that doesn't count as savings for universal credit. So if you've put aside £7,000 to pay a tax bill, that doesn't reduce your universal credit entitlement.
Okay, and is there any specific way they should declare that money when applying for universal credit, that it's not being taken into account as savings?
Yeah. So you can just you'll have to answer a bunch of questions and fill in forms that say what are your savings, and so as long as you say that if you've got £7,000 sat in an account that's for your tax, as long as you explain that to them and say that is specifically for my tax payment, that won't reduce your universal credit entitlement.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Andrea is asking, what was the cutoff date for submitting the tax return in order to be included in the scheme?
23rd April 2020. So you've got 3 more days.
But that's for the period of 2018, April 2018 until April 2019, correct?
Yeah. Yes. And yes. So the normal deadline is always the 31st of January. So in prior years, it would have been the 31st of January after the 5th of April. But they've extended it just as a one-off this year.
So to clarify, you wouldn't be able to declare any of the April 2019 until now revenue that you've got. It would just be from April 2018 until April 2019 and nothing.
Correct.
Nothing more. Okay. And the deadline again is 23rd of April. So very, very soon, in 3 days. Guys, if you haven't done it yet, just please make sure you do. Barney, would you just quickly remind us how you can submit this tax return very, very briefly?
Yeah, so again, you don't need to leave the house. You can do it all online, and it's www.gov.uk, and you just kind of go down the list of subjects and you click on self-assessment, and if you haven't done it before, a self-assessment tax return before, then you kind of just need to set up a user ID and a password. So it's a bit fiddly. So if you can't, all I would say is don't wait until the 23rd. Like if you haven't done it yet, you need to be doing it straight away after this call, because it will take you 1 or 2 days of just, paperwork, essentially figuring out the system.
We've got Nina here asking for the self-employed support scheme, and like if you are eligible, when is HMRC supposed to contact us, and how will it be? By email, via phone? When should we expect to hear back from them?
So they've said don't call us because they're kind of so busy working on it at the moment, that they've said that they will contact you in May.
Okay.
And so whether they'll write to you or email you, I don't know. But I've, I get letters and emails from HMRC. So I don't know what form it'll take, but it's not today's problem. As long as you've done your tax return, it's not today's problem.
Okay. And is there anything that, we should do to make sure that they have the right contact details to contact us, maybe updating?
Yeah, so that's a good point. You could go on to your, so let's say you filed tax returns before. If for any reason you've moved address or changed your phone or changed your email, just log into your account and make sure your phone, email and address are up to date.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Another question from Miaela. So if for 2018, 2019, I have 25K from employers and 15K from self-employed, am I able to get the scheme?
I don't think so, because that's more than 50% from employed rather than self-employed.
Okay. And as you said before, if you had previous years where you'd be above the 50% threshold, they probably would look at those rather than that year where you'd be under. Is that correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nina is asking, I have a ISA account. If I take money from it, can I put it back when the pandemic is over?
A what account?
ISA.
Oh, an ISA. Yeah. Yes. So ISA is individual savings account, and yes, you can take money out of an ISA and you don't lose the tax relief, and you can then put it back in. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. And as you said, whatever was due in July has been delayed until next January. So
yes.
you have time to be putting money back into the ISA account without being penalized.
Yes.
Wonderful. Julia, you've asked, does the ISA account count as saving?
Yes, it does.
It does count as saving. So would that be accounted? Would that account as saving for when you claim universal credit?
Mm-hmm. So if you've got £6,000 or £7,000 in an ISA, you'll probably have to declare that when you fill in the form for your universal credit, and that will affect your entitlement. If you're below £6,000, it will have no effect.
But you have to declare it so that they don't count it as a saving for universal credit, correct?
Well, I think they will count it as a saving for universal credit. Unfortunately, I could be wrong, but so by all means check that. But I think they will ask you to declare that, and that they would count that as savings.
Okay. Right. Just going through the questions again, and then we can move on to the next slide. So someone is asking, if I am not eligible for the self-employed support scheme and I'm also not eligible for universal credit, what am I eligible for?
Well, I guess the question there would be, the follow-up question I have is, why do you think you're not eligible for universal credit? Okay. So the answer to that could be because you've got more than £16,000 of savings, in which case the government are expecting you to live off your savings until you've fallen below that amount.
Okay, and am I right to say that if you have a partner, then they're also looking at your partner's income and their savings as well, so that and you being looked at as part of the same household? And
yes.
Do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a universal credit expert, but you're absolutely right. The allowances are based on they're different for whether you're a single household or whether you're in a couple, and so essentially you're cohabiting. And so that obviously, if you're married, you would be classified as a couple. But I think if you're living together in a long-term relationship, you would also be treated in that way. So that does have an impact. It is one of the things that they will ask you about when they interview you.
Okay. Thank you, Barney. Another question. Sorry, they're coming through, and that's great. So I have money box ISA accounts, but only like £100 with stocks and shares. I can't pay into it at the moment, but would you say they are too volatile, or is it good to invest in? If you can, I mean, if you can answer that or not.
So I would only be investing in something volatile like the stock market if you've got a firm foundation in place, you've got a firm platform. So only do that with money that you can kind of tie up for the long term. You know, you need to know that you've got enough cash coming in or in your bank account already to be able to pay your bills. So investing money is only something you should do with money that essentially you can afford to tie up for the long term, and you don't mind if it goes up or down.
Okay, so thank you, Barney. Julia is asking another question to confirm what you said, and people on the live bear in mind that there's a 20-second delay between what you see and what we say, so that's why some of the question might be, you know, and the response to it might be coming a bit later, or we're not reacting right away to them. So Julia was asking if I was self-employed for the majority of 2018, 2019, but was made redundant in March and started self-employment then, and completed self-assessment for 1 month only, I won't be eligible. Oh, sorry, if I was employed for the majority of 2018 and 2019, but was made redundant in March. So it means I only started self-employment then and completed self-assessment for 1 month only. It means I won't be eligible.
Possibly. Or they might say you are eligible for that 1 month, but it'll be a very small amount of money.
Okay, so I guess it's still very important for Julia to, you know, to do a tax return for that.
Yes,
year,
yes,
so that,
yes, absolutely.
So that we can make a call on
yes, yes, exactly.
One. Brilliant. So hold on, I'm going back through the question. So just to make it clear, if over £16,000 in any kinds of saving, we will not get the relief.
The universal credit.
That's universal credit, but they will still be entitled to the self-employed support scheme.
Absolutely.
And there is also something about the self-employed support scheme that I, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, Barney, but if you have over 50,000 worth of profit, you are not entitled to it either.
Yeah, only if you average. So let's say you were self-employed for 3 years. If your average, if you were over, if you're a bit over 50,000 1 year, but the average is lower than 50,000, let's say it's 49,000, then you're eligible for that amount. But it's like a cliff edge. If your average is over 50,000, you get nothing.
Okay, and the 50,000 is profit, not
profit.
What you've earned, correct?
Profit.
Profits. Do you want to? So profit is basically costs versus what you've earned. So you know.
So revenue is what you build and the cash that you got via the urban platform. You know, your costs are, you know, your allowable costs in delivering that service, so travel costs, for example. And so your profit is your income less your allowable costs, and so that's the net surplus.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So Nina, to answer your question, the 16,000 worth of saving will mean you will probably not be able to claim universal credit, but you will probably be eligible to the self-employment scheme.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, you should be able to hear from HMRC soon. We've got another question from Valdirine. So I'm married with a EU citizen, and in 1 year time, I would be able to apply for British citizenship if we never ask for any benefits. Now it's going to change if I apply for universal credit. Will that affect my ability to become a British citizen?
Again, I'm not an immigration expert. I wouldn't expect that to impact your immigration status. So by all means, kind of check that and go to the, you can go to the government's own pages to look at that. But I wouldn't expect there to be any impact from claiming universal credit on your immigration status.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And then Duncan is asking, I've filed my 2018-2019 accounts already, and I am ready to file 2019-2020 accounts. If I file these before the 23rd this year, will this be taking into account when HMRC out my average income over the 3 years?
That's very efficient, but no. So that's too efficient for the government. So they will be looking at the 3 years ended 5th of April 2019. They won't be, even if you're able to produce the latest tax return, they won't be able to process that.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Very efficient indeed. And one more question from Kelly, and then we can move on to the questions about universal credit, although I believe we've answered most of them that are on the next slide. Kelly's asking, you may already have answered my question, but if I am in my first year of self-employed, am I still able to ask for a support scheme? So again, I believe the deadline is if you have been self-employed before the 6th of April 2019,
yes,
yes, you will be eligible. If not, I'm afraid you won't, and in which case we would suggest you apply for universal credit. I'm going to move on to the next slide quickly, because we're already on a bit late on schedule. So here are a few questions that were asked. Again, very quickly, can I combine universal credit and self-employed support scheme, Barney?
Yes, you can, and yes, you should.
Okay. And then
and then the second one, how do the government estimate our universal credit? So if you look at the earlier slide, remember there was a base amount of, I think it was 343 if you're below 25 and 400 and something if you're above 25. And then they take into account, do you have children? Are you in a couple? Are you married or are you single? They take into account whether you have any health conditions that, and then they take into account your housing costs. And so all of those factors can significantly increase the amount that you get from maybe £340 a month to £1,500, £1,600 a month. So it's a big amount of variability based on your individual circumstances.
Okay. Thank you, Barney. And then the last question on this slide, which we've answered, but for clarity, I am a EU national, and last year I got the settled status in the UK. Also, I am self-employed. I heard that if I claim universal credit, this will affect or reduce my chances to become a UK citizen. What do you know about this?
again, I'm not an expert, but when the person says that they heard, if they heard it from a friend, that kind of sounds a bit like gossip to me. If you read it on an official government website, then okay. But I would be surprised. I would honestly be surprised if you've got settled status. They're not trying to. I would be very surprised. They're not trying to catch you out. So I would be very surprised if that affected or reduced your chances to become a UK citizen.
Yeah. I think on this point, like even if it is something that they've mentioned as part of official guidance, just check it again. Like they're probably going to be updating this, or clarifying these points. In the next few months. Bear in mind that there are questions that the government haven't even yet answered, and they're probably gonna get to it, as the months go by. So, like I think, keep checking the guidance that you've seen about this to see if they update any of this in the next few months. And then I think there's something that, like Barney wanted to touch on is how to, combat anxiety, financial anxiety. So do you wanna share a bit more on this, Barney?
Yeah, so I think that a big part of wellness and kind of financial wellness is not to become kind of panicked by what's going on, and really just to look after yourself as much as you possibly can. And so, the way I'm kind of treating this period, I kind of think of it like I call it monk mode, because of the lockdown, it's really quite hard to spend money at the moment. So you can't kind of go out to bars and restaurants, you can't go shopping. So I'm not spending any money at the moment. I'm just really focused on looking after myself, getting as much sleep as I can, eating clean, getting some exercise. I don't watch, I try not to watch the news, to be honest. I find it too depressing. And so kind of get out in the sunshine. Vitamin D, I think, is probably helpful for you. So I would just say kind of look after yourselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I'm taking this opportunity to remind you that every week there's about like 2 to 3 classes that you can be joining for free, either on Instagram Live via Urban, or the one that we've set every Tuesday at 6:20 for you. So, really do take advantage of that. If you wanna also like keep in touch with your peers, use the community forum to keep chatting to others. That's really important, that you do not cut yourself out during these times. I think that these are really important things. Barney, I don't know if we've got time for another maybe 3 questions, if that's okay with you.
Sure, yeah.
Brilliant. So Paris is asking, if I was employed on a 0-hour contract, earning more than 50% of my income on that, does this mean I cannot claim on the safe employed scheme? So employed as a on a 0-hour contract.
Yes, if you did earn more than 50% in that period, from employment, then the fact that it's 0 hours, I don't think it changes that.
Okay, thank you. Everton is asking, is there any benefits available to apply for council tax reduction? Or
so yeah, your housing costs will be taken into account when you apply for universal credit. So that's point 1. And then point 2 is, if you are struggling to pay your council tax, talk to your, look at the bill, look at where it says you can phone this number. There'll probably be some text on there that says, if you're in difficulties and unable to pay this bill, contact this number. So I would phone that number. And it may be that councils offer forbearance periods, deferral, and some may even have their own kind of grant schemes that they introduce.
Okay, and also bear in mind, utility bills, even like, recurring, direct debits that you're getting, try to get in touch with any of the providers and see if there is a way to be deferring or posing some of those, that can be your membership at the gym, or even, contact your insurers as well. They might be able to help and see if they can pose your insurance and on what term. I think it's important to ask. And one last question before we wrap up would be, if I am a director of a registered company but only pay myself as a freelancer, will this affect my claim in any way?
So if you're the director of the company and you're paying yourself as a freelancer,
yeah.
So essentially you are a director, but you're also kind of a contractor to the company. So again, I think that would still make you eligible. I can't think off the top of my head. I haven't seen anything in the guidance that says if you're providing those services to a company where you're a director, then you're not eligible. So I think it would be worth proceeding on the assumption that you are eligible.
Okay, brilliant. And then on the last, that's all for question for now. Here is the last slide of the presentation. So that's where you can find more information, about what Barney just said. We will be sharing the slides. We'll be sharing the slide as well as, if you're happy for that, of course, Barney. And we will be also, sharing the presentation with the wider community. So if you would like to watch it again, or if someone would like to watch it, just share the link of this video. Will be publicly available for a while.
So the first on that page, the first two websites are the official government website. So you don't have to kind of take my word for it. You can go and look yourself at the guidance, and I would encourage everyone to keep an eye on that. And then the third one is the Citizens Advice Bureau. And if you cannot pay your bills, someone at the Citizens Advice Bureau will talk to you about your individual circumstances. So you should be able to get kind of one-on-one counseling free of charge from the Citizens Advice Bureau. So I think that's a very helpful, they're essentially, a gatekeeper to the benefits system, and they've just seen this sort of stuff before. They've dealt with a lot of people in financial difficulties. So like, why wouldn't you, and they're not trying to make money off you. It's a charity. And then finally, the Money Saving Expert website. Again, I've given you the address there. That site's very good on kind of putting the government guidelines into plain English, and they're not trying to sell you products that you don't need. So no, those are all good sources of information.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Barney. I think that's all. Thank you all for attending this webinar. I really do hope that this helped making sense of what's available, whether you were eligible for the government grant for self-employed, how to make the most of universal credit, and answer your questions as much as possible. Barney, anything that you would like to add?
No, thank you very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you for being here today, guys. I'll see you very soon, and I'll see you on the forum if you have more questions. And I wish you a good day. Bye.